In January 1997, inside a Philadelphia opera house, a single shareholder vote was about to decide who would own the eastern half of the American railroad system in a battle worth more than $10 billion. Hundreds of people in suits were screaming at their own board of directors. Conrail employees waved signs, some with tears in their eyes. Lawyers ran through hallways with injunctions. A federal judge had criticized the process as unfair 1 week earlier. Fundamentally unfair. The court said the process did not properly protect shareholders, and yet here they stood, because the board had simply picked a new date and carried on as if nothing had been said. The vote ends. 65% vote against their own board. 29% of the company's own employees vote against the deal their bosses had negotiated. This was not about a railroad. This was about who would control the eastern half of America for the next 50 years. To understand why two railroad giants were trying to destroy each other over Conrail, you need to know what Conrail was. In 1968, the Pennsylvania Railroad and the New York Central merged into Penn Central. These were century-old rivals, the Broadway Limited and the 20th Century Limited, suddenly forced to work together. Incompatible cultures, duplicate routes, and executives who hated each other. Within 2.5 years, Penn Central was bankrupt, with $326 million in losses in 1970 alone. It had been the sixth largest corporation in America, responsible for a massive share of intercity passenger and freight rail, and it lay flat on its back. The solution was Conrail, a government-funded corporation that merged 6 bankrupt northeastern railroads into one system. It began on April 1, 1976. It employed 100,000 people, and it was losing $1 million per day. The federal government owned 85%. Nobody expected it to survive. But then came Stanley Crane. He was the retired chief executive of the Southern Railway. He took over in 1981, and within a year posted the first profit in Conrail's history, $39 million. He cut thousands of miles of unprofitable track, let the union see his book so they could understand how bad it was, and used the Staggers Rail Act to finally set his own rates. By 1983, Conrail was the 4th largest freight carrier in America. The company that lost $1 million a day was now making $1 million a day. In 1987, it went public. It was one of the largest industrial initial public offerings of its era. Shares were priced in the high 20s per share. Nearly $2 billion were returned to the Treasury. Stanley Crane had turned a federal bailout into a profitable enterprise, and now everybody wanted it. October 15, 1996, CSX and Conrail announced a friendly merger for $8.4 billion. David Good of Norfolk Southern hears about it that morning when John Snow from CSX calls to tell him the news. Norfolk Southern was completely blindsided. They had no idea this was coming. But within 8 days, Good had his countermove ready. $9.1 billion, all cash, $100 per share versus CSX's $92.50 per share. Wall Street scrambled to secure credit lines. Norfolk Southern locked in multi-billion-dollar financing before the coffee was cold. Good told the press, "We're in this to win. We believe this is a very compelling transaction." Conrail's board refused to even talk to Norfolk Southern about their offer. They had a deal with CSX and they were sticking with it. Rumors circulated that Conrail CEO David Levan had been promised the top job at the merged company, that the headquarters would move to Philadelphia. But Pennsylvania's anti-takeover law said you could not buy more than 20% without shareholder approval. CSX already had 19.9%. The absolute maximum. To go any further, the shareholders had to vote to opt out of that law. Norfolk Southern kept raising its bid. $110 per share, $115 per share. All cash, no stock swap complications. CSX came in at $104 per share with a mix of cash and stock. The difference was hundreds of millions of dollars in shareholder value. And yet Conrail's board stuck with CSX despite their fiduciary duty to seriously consider the best offer on the table. The vote was scheduled for January 17, 1997 at the Academy of Music in Philadelphia. Norfolk Southern played their final card just before the vote. They publicly promised to immediately buy 9.9% of Conrail shares at $115 if shareholders voted against the CSX deal. That was the maximum without triggering the poison pill. It was a direct financial incentive for every shareholder to vote no. That vote was a massacre for Conrail's management. 65% voted against the deal. 35% voted in favor. An analyst called it a landslide. Even 29% of Conrail's own employees who owned shares through their pension plan voted against their own bosses. David Levan tried to act tough afterward, saying that the resolve of the Conrail board would not be shaken, but the resolve of the shareholders had been considerably clearer. On March 7, 1997, the compromise came. CSX and Norfolk Southern would buy Conrail together for $10.2 billion and split it. Norfolk Southern received 58% and CSX received 42%. It was the first time in American history that two competitors jointly acquired a company to divide it between them. The Surface Transportation Board approved the deal on July 23, 1998, with extended federal oversight, still nervous after the Union Pacific and Southern Pacific disaster. And here is where it gets interesting for anyone who knows their railroad history. Norfolk Southern got primarily the old Pennsylvania Railroad lines. CSX got primarily the old New York Central lines. Think about that for a moment. The Pennsylvania Railroad and the New York Central had been rivals since the 1880s, the Broadway Limited racing the 20th Century Limited. Different philosophies, different engineering cultures, different ways of running a railroad. In 1968, someone decided they should merge. That decision created Penn Central, which became the largest bankruptcy in American history, which created Conrail, which now in 1999 was being split back into its original pieces. 31 years later, the merger that should never have happened was effectively undone. The rivals who should never have been joined together were separated again, only now under new owners who actually knew what they were doing. On June 1, 1999, CSX and Norfolk Southern began operating their portions of what had been Conrail. 23 years of Conrail were over. There were immediate problems as expected. Computer systems were incompatible. Freight cars were misreported. Major shippers reported significant delays. Unlike the Union Pacific and Southern Pacific merger that caused months of chaos in Houston, that situation eventually stabilized. Conrail still exists today as a jointly owned subsidiary with 1,200 miles of track in North Jersey, Philadelphia, and Detroit, neutral ground where both railroads have equal access. That vote in Philadelphia was not a victory of the small investor against corporate arrogance. It was a demonstration of what happens when a board of directors thinks loyalty to a handshake outweighs fiduciary duty to shareholders. But more than that, it decided the shape of American freight rail for generations. Norfolk Southern and CSX split the Northeast between them. The Pennsylvania Railroad and the New York Central, rivals since the 1880s, were finally allowed to go their separate ways. That vote did not just decide the fate of Conrail, it decided who would control the rail arteries of half a continent for the next 50 years.